3, 2, 1.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Nittany No Huddle Podcast.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Nittany No Huddle Podcast. We got Zach on the horn. Jordan's never here, even though he's our leader. I don't know what's going on. Zach, how you doing? How you feeling after that one?
Just another ho-hum 12 or noon start in the state of Illinois with a win that people I think are not going to be happy with, but we're going to get into where maybe there's some positives. Obviously, there's some negatives to talk about, but my general takeaway is the classic Joe Paterno quote: "You're never as good as you think you are after a win, and you're never as bad as you are after a loss." I think the thing to add to that is you're never as bad as you are after a 28-point win that you're not happy with because you're ranked and Northwestern stinks. And so there's always positives there. And I think we're going to talk about some stuff I think that at least gives us some reason for optimism. But because we're analytical and fair here, I think we're going to talk about the bad as well. And so if you don't like that, too bad.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. I feel like that's something that we really pride ourselves on here at Nittany No Huddle is we want to be homers. We want to support our team. I mean, we all want Penn State in the college football playoff this year, but we also got to be realistic. And overall, this was not a pretty game. I think what's his name, the announcer? Jake Butt. Is that who it was?
Yeah, Jake Butt was on the call today.
Which, by the way, thank God we aren't terrible because I couldn't deal with Big Ten announcers every week. Like, nothing against them, but you remember the old days when we had those noon Beth Mullins games?
She was the absolute worst. Brock Heward was another one that just
just thank God we're good so we can have good announcers for the most part. Anyways, that's a little off topic, but I think he summed it up the best. It was like early mid fourth quarter. He said that the defense looks championship caliber and they played championship caliber. The offense leaves a little bit to desire. And I guess maybe that's where we can start. First talking point for us today is, Zach, can any team in America make a 28-point win look that bad? I mean, we went 41-13, and the whole game I was like, are we going to lose? Like, is Northwestern going to win this? And we win 41-13. So I don't know. What do you think about it to win by 28 and just look that bad at times?
I don't know if it's the noon start for me, but that one I was less anxious. I mean, at no point that I think, oh my gosh, I think Northwestern might actually win this game. I mean, it seemed apparent that other than the two drives where, the first half drive, the drive in the first half where they scored a touchdown, they really did not move the ball at all. And I actually kind of felt like they're going to get their quarterback hurt. That's what it looked like, and ultimately he did get hurt. And I think you're absolutely right. We were texting, and that looked like a pretty serious injury to me. I wouldn't be surprised if he's out for a significant period of time, but. The one thing about this team, I think the defense across the board is elite and legit. But the thing in this game that was the takeaway that, man, we are just so dominant and so much better than Northwestern is that pass rush against their offensive line. I mean, and we could sit here and name names, but honestly, it's three deep at defensive tackle and defensive end with guys that are out there contributing and guys that are playing at a high level. Obviously, Chop and Adisa on the edge, and Danny Dennis-Sutton I thought had a really good game. He not only in the pass rush, he moved laterally and blew up a lot of outside run plays, and just like everything Northwestern wanted to do. I want to go back and check the stats. I have to say, if I had to guess, I would say 50% of their yardage came on QB scrambles. That was the one thing that they had that extended a few. They converted a couple. Second and third, 15. Second long, third and long with long QB runs that were just kind of like broken plays. And we've talked about that before with the DS style where we're gonna blitz and play a lot of man. And so there's gonna be some times where you get the pressure home and the QB just slips away or makes a nice play. And sometimes he's gonna have some running room. And I think you can live with that because for every one time that happens, you're getting home 2 or 3 times and you're beating the quarterback up and you're just making the offensive coordinator think about things and call a game in a scared way. And so, we could sit here and talk all day about the defense, and I don't think we need to. I think anybody that watched that game realizes, look, they scored. Northwestern got 3 on that very first drive off of the Singleton fumble.
Where they had negative yards on the drive.
Right. And they had that drive in the trying to remember if it was the first quarter or second. I think it was the second quarter where Northwestern marched and they put a nice drive together and they ended up in the end zone. That was the one drive all game where it was something more than just QB scrambles, that they actually connected on some slants across the middle. They really didn't run the ball. I can't even, as far as designed run plays, I'm struggling to recall a play where they popped something for more than 7 or 8 yards. So yeah, the defense is going to travel. Defense is going to be everywhere. I think we can play with anybody. Again, we've talked stylistically that Michigan game is different. It's just going to look a little different than what most of these Big Ten teams are playing. But Columbus is coming up in a couple weeks, and I think today's game is only going to ratchet up the anxiety level for Penn State fans. But
Correct.
I like the way that the defense plays. I like the way that they're structured. And while I'm not necessarily confident of a victory there, I think the way that we play defensively gives me a lot of confidence with what Ohio State's trying to do.
I completely agree with you. We have it in our group chat. We have a big group chat with a lot of people that aren't on the podcast and everything. And people
shout out
instantly are saying, there's no shot we win in Ohio or at Ohio State in a couple of weeks. All these, I still feel all right. I just feel like that game might be 10-7, and that's okay. That's a classic Big Ten game to me. I think that we truly have an absolutely elite defense that can stop anybody. They're gonna give up plays. That's Manny Diaz's style. Things are gonna happen where teams are gonna get these chunk plays, but they're not gonna put enough together to be consistent throughout for a full 48-minute football game. They might get one big chunk play, and then Penn State finds a way. I think back to that goal line stop there I think that was in the fourth quarter when the quarterback got hurt. That's a huge defensive stop to hold them from getting, I think it was 1st and goal at the 4, to not get a touchdown there. That's that whole bend don't break defense that Manny Diaz is clearly a pushing right now and has been for the last 2 years. Like you said, we could name pretty much everybody on the defensive line. There were so many outstanding performances. And to your point about rushing, so I know ESPN's box score isn't always it gets updated after the game sometimes, but just pulling that up quickly, their leading rusher today was their backup quarterback. 25 carries for 25 yards on 7 carries, including that 18-yard run on 3rd and 15. The longest run they had, Ben Bryant, their starting quarterback, had a 14-yard run. The backup quarterback had an 18-yard run, and Cam Porter had 18 yards on 7 carries. So they, as a team, had 45 yards on 32 carries. And I think defense is usually where ESPN is the worst, right during the game. They have Penn State at 12 TFLs and 7 sacks. It felt like even more, honestly. And I just, man, it's pretty crazy how good I think this defense is. So to our point of, are there any positives? This defense is a championship caliber team. I truly believe that. And I think to even take it one step further, and maybe you have any comments on this, Zach, we have a kicker. I feel very confident in Alex Felkins. I think that maybe from 40 in, I feel really confident. If anything over that, I haven't seen yet, so I'm not going to say I'm confident in that. But I don't feel like we're going to go miss an extra point like we could have at points throughout the worst period of our time. And Riley Thompson had his best punting game of the season today. And he had that one that just boomed down the field and pinned them deep. Special teams is, in those regards, I think is getting there. We need to figure out the kick return, punt return situation. Maybe you want to say something about this. I'll throw it to you here. Caden Saunders, you call him out 2 weeks ago for having he was really steady through 3 games. Last week was not good. And this week, 2 or 3 times he calls fair catch. And I think he has plenty of yards. And then he tries to catch 1 or 2 and it didn't make sense to me. So I think we got to figure that out. He really was steady through those first 3 games, and now he's being sketchy again. But before we move to our biggest concerns about offense, we got an elite defense. It seems like we have an okay special teams. Is that how you feel as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll kind of put a bow on the defense, and then I'll touch on some of the special team stuff that you referenced there. The number one thing for me is, and I just actually texted you guys to take a look at the USC Colorado score. For me, I think your offense can grow over the course of the season. You can find things that you maybe didn't know early in the season. You didn't know this guy was going to be a player, or you didn't know that, our outside zone run scheme was actually going to be better than our man or gap stuff. You can find that out. Defensively, I don't think you can do that. I think if you don't tackle well in September, you're not going to be a good tackling team in November. I think you can improve, but it's a lot harder to just say we're not good right now, but we're going to figure it out, because defense is a lot more based on just physical attributes and speed and strength and discipline and obviously there's a lot of scheme involved, but it's more sort of reactionary. So I think if you're at this point in the season and you're like, man, we can't stop anybody. We're USC and we've given up 41 points to Colorado. We'll figure it out. I don't know. I don't think you are. I think offensively, unless you're like really bad, I think if you have the pieces, and I think we have the pieces, right, there's always the chance that we're going to find it. We're going to figure it out. We're going to get that receiver rotation locked in. We're going to, we got Trey Potts in the mix now. We're going to find something. So I'm a little bit more confident in the defenses ahead of the offense than if it was vice versa. And then just to touch on the special teams, I think you nailed it. I think from where we were at in week 1, I feel really good about the kicking game. And with the defense that we have, I'm totally fine with a kicker that it's like, hey, we're really confident with this guy from about 40, 42 and in. And if we're staying longer than that, if it's a reasonable distance, I'm all for going for it, right? We've got a really good defense. Part of having the really good defense, you can look at it two ways. One is, don't take chances and really pin the other team's offense back. I also think you can look at it like you have a little bit more freedom to go for it in certain situations when you're on their side of the 50, because you can say, I believe in our defense. So if it's 4th and 5 from the 45 and it's like, we probably should punt here, but I think you can have a little bit more confidence if you think you have the right play lined up to say, if we don't get it, I trust our defense. Well, they're going to get a stop. And just having that complementary football where you're not, again, like the USC example that we always make fun of them, and we use it sort of every now or every Lincoln Riley coach team, where it's like you have to coach differently on offense because you have this giant gaping flaw on the other side of the ball that you either have to be super aggressive on offense to try to counter it, or you got to be very conservative because you don't want to put your defense in a bad spot. I don't think we have that problem. But the return game, just to wrap up the conversation, I mean, Singleton, there's not a lot you can say there. You can't fumble the opening kickoff. I thought Northwestern did a great job, and I think teams should be doing a lot more of this, of kicking it on the ground deep into the corner. It's risky because, the football always bounces weird and you might kick it out of bounds and the other team gets the ball in the 40. But a lot of teams don't like to return it at all until they do the fair catch and get it to 25. You put it on the ground, they got to field it, right? And that one was a weird one where like a couple guys let it go because they weren't sure. Singleton kind of tracked it down very oddly. He picks it up at like the 5, and because of all the bouncing of the ball, the coverage team is already kind of down there at the 15. So even if he didn't fumble, that was a great execution by Northwestern. But again, you just can't fumble. I don't know what it is. Northwestern, I think he had 2 or 3 fumbles last year against Northwestern. Allen had a couple, just sloppy. But again, that's where the defense bows up and just says you're kicking a field goal. And that to me, this game could have gotten a little bit scarier if Northwestern punches that in for a touchdown right out of the gate. You're like, oh, man, what is going on? So another hat tip to the defense to just kind of stabilize after a really ugly moment there.
Yeah, and I mean, if they maybe have a little bit of a crowd there at Northwestern and Northwestern scores a touchdown on that drive, that is concerning for sure. But I saw that it was, take away the COVID year, this was the smallest crowd to watch a Penn State game in the James Franklin era. It was like 24,000 or something like that. It's just kind of crazy to think about. So anyways, let's move on. We're about halfway through here. Let's switch to what I assume we both want to talk about as our biggest concern, which is offense. I would love to hear your opinion here, Zach, on do we think that Drew Aller played scared? Do we think he's too conservative? Or do you think Yursich is too conservative? Or do you think it's some sort of a combination of all the above? Because, I mean, Aller, to his credit, has still not thrown an interception in his career, but he was 18 of 33 for 189 yards, meaning he averaged 5.7 yards per completion. 5.7 yards. And Nick Singleton had 6 catches. Keandre Lambert-Smith had 4, and then nobody else on the team had more than 2. And that was Tyler Warren, Theo Johnson, and Dante Cephas. Is that a concern, or are we? I'm confused. I guess more than concerned, I'm confused, and I don't know if maybe that's how you feel too. I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, I would say confused is a good word. I'm slightly confused as well, and part of it is we number one, we're not in the huddle. We're not at practice. So we don't,
Right.
we're not in the coach's room, game planning the week. And we're also watching on TV, unless you're one of these guys that follows up after the game and you get the all 22 where you can see. Sometimes it's hard to know, like, why isn't Aller throwing deep? Well, maybe nobody's running a deep route, right? Or why isn't Yurcich calling for more deep throws? And then we're not seeing somebody's actually wide open down the field and Aller missed it. So to answer your question, it's probably a little bit of both. But my big takeaway is I feel like we've got an aspect of the offense, namely the arm strength of the quarterback, that is not, I wouldn't even say being underutilized. It's not being utilized at all. And even that deep ball that he threw to, I can't remember if it was Cephas or Lambert Smith at this point.
I think it was Cephas.
Was it Cephas? I just remember the Patriot News photographer getting absolutely annihilated. But even though we didn't connect, we almost connected, and the receiver had him beat, and Aller didn't underthrow it. So it was one of those, like, the worst thing that happens is an incompletion. But you put that on film, you in the moment, that defensive coordinator has to say, hey, my guy just got beat deep, and we almost got burnt for 7. And you're incorporating that into your offense such that the defense has to account for it. And I just feel like, I honestly think that was the first time, like, all year, or at least since the Lambert Smith touchdown, where, like, I can't even remember
play of the season.
Yeah, I can't even remember us, like, throwing deep and just missing, like, badly. Right? Like, I don't even remember any attempts down the field that length. And I like the idea of efficiency, and we're gonna connect underneath. But when you have that arm strength, you have to put it on tape, and you have to make sure that the defenses are accounting for it, because a lot of the dink and dunk stuff. And again, I'm going to get back into the Ohio State, Michigan stuff, which we try not to talk about all the time. But, like, against lesser defenses, you can have long drives where you're marching downfield, picking up smaller gains. The better defenses aren't going to give you that. They're going to try to take away everything all at the same time, right? Northwestern has to play a little bit more conservatively, keep guys high. They don't want to give up the big play, right? Because they know that you can out-athlete them. When you're playing a team that you can't out-athlete, they're not going to play scared. They're going to say, we're going to get up in your face. We're going to make you earn it. And it's not that I don't think we can do it. We haven't seen much of it. And it scares me a little bit. And I know the problem is not that Aller doesn't have the arm for it.
Right.
Going back to the last couple of years, Clifford gets ragged on a lot. And I was kind of a Clifford defender. But one of his obvious flaws was that he didn't have the arm strength that Aller does. And, there was a lot of deep balls over the years that he threw that were underthrown. But we at least took a lot of shots. It felt like over the years we took shots. And again, maybe that is part of having a KJ Hamler, having Parker Washington, Mitchell Tinsley. They weren't, like, neither one of those guys were super speed burners, but they could go deep on you if necessary. And I don't know. I don't know if it's they don't trust the receivers. So that's a long-winded answer to your question. And the answer being, I don't really know, because I think probably part of it is some of Aller wanting to be safe, right? And make the safe throw and keep the drive moving and not throw an interception. And some of it might also be Yurcich knowing, I've got a relatively young quarterback. I want to help him out. I don't want to put too much on his shoulders. We love our defense. So let's just call it somewhat cautiously, right? We don't know if it's one or the other. It's probably somewhere in the middle, but as we always say, we're not at practice, so we don't know.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, I think two more things before we get off of this and maybe talk about the running game a little bit. You got to imagine that Aller heard everything last year about, like, Clifford had that winner's mentality to where he would almost force things because he was so dedicated to winning the game that he thought he had to make a play in positions where he didn't need to make a play. And you got to imagine that playing with him for a whole year, and you hear that, like, they all say, oh, I don't check social media. They do. Like, every college athlete knows that stuff. You got to imagine that all that, the boo birds complaining about Clifford's interceptions, I can't say that there's no shot that Aller didn't hear that for a year and think I'm not going to do that next year. I'm not throwing interceptions. I think Yurcich probably heard that too and is trying to ease him in and be cautious and get through games. The other thing I'll say is, and I think Jake Butt kind of said this again to shout out the announcer, and Northwestern's DBs did not look intimidated by our wide receivers. And I have not seen any DB this year that looks intimidated by our wide receivers. Like, I don't feel like our wide receivers can get any separation. So why there's very limited opportunities. Yes, we've pointed out there's been a handful of times this year where you can see a Liam Clifford that gets some separation and Allard misses him. There's been a couple times where I feel like Theo Johnson has been open in the middle of the field and Aller doesn't quite see him or decides I'm going to tuck it and run. Again, being cautious, I think is probably an okay thing, and especially with the defense we have. But I do think that we have a wide receiver problem, and I mean, obviously it's going to sound like, oh, Devin's defending Aller again, but I think we have a wide receiver problem because to kind of transition here to our offensive line and our running game, the running game struggled again today. It ended up very effectively with 134 yards on 39 carries, 3.5 yards per carry. I mean, that on paper doesn't sound terrible, but you and I talked about this in our group chat, is that I feel like Penn State has remedied one problem, our pass blocking. We can hold a block long enough to let Aller throw it. We couldn't do that with Hackenberg and into Clifford for a long period of time. We couldn't even hold them for 1 second before the QB was getting crushed. So we've remedied that, but we can't create holes for our running backs to run through. And I feel like Singleton is getting frustrated. And I feel like people are getting on Singleton, that he looks slower. He looks like he's not as explosive as he was. I feel like there's less holes when you watch the film. I don't know where he's supposed to go. And maybe he is bad at reading the holes. I'm not sure, but I don't see any holes for him to run through. So I think that maybe that is part of our issue overall as a whole. And I don't know if you have similar thoughts on that, or if you think I'm off base, or I'm not. I feel like we've fixed one problem and kind of almost created a secondary problem because of fixing the first problem. I don't know.
Yeah, so two things. One thing I'll say is a complaint that I often have, and I may be totally wrong, and some of our commenters that are more X and O oriented may call me out in the comments, but I think we do not give Singleton and Allen, but especially Singleton, enough under center traditional I-form run situations where they're receiving the handoff at a full head of steam, right? We do so much of this RPO, line up next to the quarterback, take a shuffle step, and get the ball basically while not moving. And then it's like find the hole, right? And I think Singleton's strength is his best attribute, at least last year, was his speed, was his game-breaking speed. And I don't see that we're putting him in run formations or run setups where we're actually utilizing his speed. I think his vision has gotten better. I think he's still probably trailing Allen a little bit in terms of that handoff, the shotgun handoff. I think suits Allen a little bit better because he is more of sort of a one-step vision, find the hole, get in there, spin, get a couple yards. That I think he's good at that. I think Singleton, I'd like to see more sort of outside stretch plays where he's receiving it under center in the I form. He's just full head of steam, right? And let him beat somebody to the corner. Again, I'm not an offensive line expert. I'm not an offensive coordinator by any stretch, but I just think that for a guy whose game is speed, I want him getting the ball while he's already moving and utilizing his speed. The last thing I'll say, just from a format or from a formation standpoint, I think they really love 12 personnel, 2 tight ends out there, which I do too. I think we've got 2 really good tight ends. But part of that is you're bringing more people into the box, right?
That's fair.
A lot of the Big 12, you see a lot of the Big 12 teams, or like Lincoln Riley is a great example. People think that those Oklahoma teams and this USC team the last couple of years throw the ball 60 times a game and they never run the ball, and that's really not true. Actually, Lincoln Riley teams really run the ball very, very well. Again, it's kind of easy to do that when you have like the best quarterback in the country and Hollywood Brown and Drake London and all these wide receivers that are getting put into the NFL, but they run the ball. And I think the way that the Lincoln Riley, Mike Leach air raid style is by putting more receivers out into the boundary, you're actually drawing defenders away and opening up running room in the middle where there's less blockers for you offensively, but there's less defenders as well. So what it does is there's just way more space. So it puts, it creates a numbers game, and there's like there's one unblocked guy on the defense that has to make the tackle. And if he doesn't, it's a 10, 15, 20-yard run play because there's just not people there. When you bring 2 tight ends into the box, you're bringing 2 more defenders into the box. And that's, I think that's why I think you see our run game is in this weird flux right now where like, I think it's actually pretty efficient, and we're like not getting blown up and we're not losing yards. We're just getting a lot of like 3-yard carries where there's not a lot there, but we get 3 yards and that's good. And it's not a problem, but we're not running out of formations where I think we're giving ourselves a lot of opportunity to bust the big one. Part of that, again, though, gets back to your point where if we feel like we don't trust our wide receivers, it's a lot easier and maybe better to put our two tight ends on the field because we love Johnson and we love Warren. So
Yeah.
part of it is we can sit here and Monday morning quarterback all we like and say we'd love to see this, we'd love to see that. But good coaching also puts your best players on the field.
Right.
And if we think our best players, playing our best players as much as possible means, two tight ends, well, then you have to accept that that's going to limit, number one, the downfield passing game because you're taking out a smaller speed guy and putting a Tyler Warren or a Theo Johnson on the field. And it's also putting another run defender into the box. And I don't think that doing that has been problematic for us because I think we've been pretty good in the run game. It's just, it puts a cap, I think, on the explosive play topic that everybody's talking about, that Franklin's been asking questions about. I think our best players and our best offensive strategy right now is such that it's just one that kind of limits explosive plays for better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all great analysis and totally valid. And I'd be interested in, I feel like you're probably better at finding the snap breakdown and counts and stuff like that. I would love to know what it was last year, like how many times, and this would be pretty hard for us to find with our resources as a very tiny little podcast. I would love to see how many times we were in 12 personnel last year versus this year at this point in the season to see if there is some correlation, because I just Googled it just to make sure. Last year, Nick Singleton was 12th or 18th in the nation, 18th in all of FBS. He had 12 runs of at least 20 yards in the season. His longest run now through 5 games is 19 yards against Iowa. So I hear all the concerns, and I think that some of those concerns are valid, but I don't think we need to be too worried yet. I really don't. I think, I mean, it's obvious that UMass is pretty bad. That should be a pretty easy game coming off of this bye week. Franklin finally might win a game after a bye week because it's UMass and they're pretty terrible. I think the concerns are valid, but I think that maybe we don't have to hammer the panic button like Zach sent into the group chat earlier. I think maybe we're circling around it. We got a finger ready to push it, but we're not pounding on it yet. I still think that we have a college football playoff caliber team if our offense can just figure out some little things. We're not far off. We're really not. I think our defense is elite. I think our special teams is very solid. And I think our offense has some pieces to be very successful. We got to tie them all together. And I think, like you said there, Zach, that's part of good coaching. Get your best players on the field and come up with a plan that utilizes your best players. So I think we're still figuring that out. And thankfully, now we have 2 weeks until basically from today, 3 weeks until Ohio State kicks off. Another big noon game, as Joe Klatt, good friend of the podcast, leaked this week that game is going to be at noon. It has still not been officially announced, but everyone knows it's going to be at noon. So I don't know. I'm really not crazy stressed, but I know there are people that are. And maybe at halftime, if we would have went on live at halftime at 10-10, maybe I'd be a little bit more concerned and we found a way to win 41-13 or whatever it was. But I don't know. I feel like we're still perfectly fine. We're fine. We got it. So, Zach, any last comments here? We got about a minute and a half till we hit that half-hour mark. Appreciate the handful of people that are watching us here. It's been a little lighter today. These noon games, we don't usually get as many on the instant reaction because people have lives to live. But I guess I can throw Tim threw a comment here. 48-41 will not be the score in Columbus. Yeah, absolutely agreed. Will not be the score, I don't think. And Drew, thanks, Drew, for joining us. You just saw your comment here. Glad we got the win, but couldn't stand the super conservative play calling. Absolutely. Go back and watch the first half of this podcast. We've been talking about that quite a bit. Had a whole segment on it. So thanks for joining and commenting. Zach, any last comments here?
I'll just kind of wrap up with where you were at before those few comments there with, we are hypersensitive Penn State fans and we watch every play and we kind of critique every play, and we don't have time to look at the other top programs in the country in that same vein, other than making fun of USC maybe every week. But I know, especially this year, if we were Georgia fans, we would be talking about what Jordan talks about, which is why can't we score in the first quarter? If we're Ohio State fans, we'd be saying,
by the way,
why
it's
can't we get Marvin
3-0.
Harrison?
Georgia's
I saw that,
down
yeah,
3-0. So,
and Ohio State, why can't we get Marvin Harrison the ball? Texas, how can we beat Alabama, but we struggle with Wyoming? So I think every other fan base is going through this same like mini existential crisis that we go through when we struggle. And it should remind us that I don't think there are any truly elite teams this year, or at least compared to years past. So I think everybody has flaws. It's just questions of, one, how do you minimize your flaws? Or two, can you over the course of the season make those flaws go away?
I'm with you. I agree. So I think that's a good place to end up. I honestly don't know. Jordan hasn't talked to us yet about this week with us having a bye week. We'll be on at some point this week to talk about all things week 5 of the college football season. Don't forget, if you haven't already, let me see if we have that on here.
And while you're looking for that, I'll just remind everybody, if nothing else, we'll be tuning in to do our pick'ems and just to go over how big of a lead I'm breaking out to at this point. Yeah, I assume Kentucky ended up winning. I didn't check the final there.
I didn't either, but
they were putting it on Florida. It was kind of odd.
Yeah. So here was the last thing. We've been trying to shout this out as much as we can. We probably only got a couple days left. I don't think we have a firm deadline of when this ends, but it is coming up rapidly quick. So if you are a subscriber here to our YouTube channel, make sure you go over to Instagram or Facebook and send us a DM that you are a subscriber. So just send a picture of a screenshot to us either on Facebook or Instagram. It enters you in this contest to win 2 free tickets and a parking pass, a really good parking pass, by the way. It's like a $60 value in and of itself. 2 tickets and a parking pass to the Rutgers at Penn State game at the end of this year. There's only about 20 people entered right now, so try to enter. Helps us keep reaching that goal. We have a huge goal of we have this little podcast, and we have a really big goal of trying to get to 500 subscribers before the end of the season. And we are getting closer and closer every week. We take a couple steps. We get like 8 to 10 new people. So this is a way that tell your friends that if they like Penn State football, all they got to do is subscribe and send us a DM, and they get entered into winning this contest. So we'll close with that. Again, thanks everyone for watching. Penn State's undefeated. And at the end of the day, they won. They covered the spread. They scored more than 30, and they won by 14. So the streaks are all still alive. So until next time, see you later, Nittany No Huddle Nation.
Thanks for watching the Nittany No Huddle podcast.
Check us out on Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook.
Podcasts are posted weekly on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Make sure to like and subscribe so you never miss one of our new shows.